It's game day on the University of Alabama campus, and you're looking live at Bryant-Denny Stadium, where in just under 10 hours from now, two of the most storied programs in college football history will square off on the gridiron. It's the Crimson Tide and the Nittany Lion, and we break it all down starting right now. Next on Crimson Tide Kickoff.
Understand you're playing against one of the best college teams we've ever played against.
The legend of Joe Pa comes back to the house that Bear Bryant built. We'll break down the game, compare coaches, and look back at the moments that made this series great.
Bowman, he didn't make it.
Also ahead, can a freshman quarterback handle the difficult Tide defense? And will a depleted Bama lineup matter in a showdown of top 25 foes? Plus, we'll go around the SEC, talk live with guests, and get predictions from a man who knows both politics and football. If this show wasn't on, well, that would just be bad.
And I think it would be a prime shame.
It's Crimson Tide Kickoff, and it's next.
Live from the campus of the University of Alabama, this is Crimson Tide Kickoff with Gary Harris and John Huddleston. Brought to you by AT&T and by Alpha Insurance.
Another game day, another week of tailgating, more big plays, more creative coaching, and of course, more of Crimson Tide Kickoff. Back for round two of the big show. Along with Gary Harris, I'm John Huddleston. You ready to go today?
Ready or not. I tell you, a little bit different.
A little muggy today, isn't it?
You know, last Saturday we were bragging about the weather. Unseasonably cool, low humidity. Well, guess what? Alabama weather is back. It is muggy already at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, it is. And this is Crimson Tide Kickoff, presented by Alpha Insurance and AT&T, the official wireless communications provider for Crimson Tide Athletics. AT&T, rethink possible. A lot coming up today, Gary.
Indeed, John. We got a lot to talk about on the program this morning. We'll be joined by several guests, including ESPN's Brad Edwards and veteran sports writer Malcolm Moran, who now is employed by the Pennsylvania State University. So he'll have an interesting take on today's game. And we'll also talk about how this ball game today is making one couple a house divided.
But first this morning, we set the scene for you. And when you talk about college football tradition and prestige, Alabama and Penn State are usually at the top of the list. Today's game will be the first meeting between the Tide and the Nittany Lion since 1990. The series, though, has been filled with great plays and great moments. None bigger than the 1979 game and the goal line stand. But that was more than 30 years ago. Joe Paterno is still at the top of his coaching game in Happy Valley, but he now has to play a Nick Saban-led Alabama team ranked #1 in the nation. The two coaches have faced each other before, back when Saban was the head coach at Michigan State.
You know, one thing when you play Joe Paterno coach teams with
Played in Michigan State, they played tough, but he's got better talent at Alabama than he had at Michigan State.
Here's a quick scouting report on the Nittany Lions. They're currently 19th in the Associated Press poll, 14th in the coaches poll. Now, last week against Youngstown State, Robert Bolden became the first freshman quarterback to start a season opener at Penn State under Joe Paterno, and he played pretty well. Completed nearly 70% of his passes. He had 240 yards of offense, a couple of touchdowns. But Joe Pa is a little more concerned for his young quarterback's welfare this week. After all, he will be facing the top-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide.
He's going to get knocked on his. We can't protect him like we did against Youngstown. He's going to get knocked around. Alabama's too good for that.
And an interesting note on Robert Bolden. His uncle is former Crimson Tide and Miami Dolphin great Don McNeil. Now, you see the goal line stand all the time. We'll see it. We've already seen it. We'll see it several more times on this program this morning. But that goal line stand was set up by the fact that Don McNeil made a great tackle on a swing pass, forced the Penn State receiver out of bounds at the 1-yard line when it looked like he would score. That set up the goal line stand. Now, Robert Bolden has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of focus, but the leader on offense for the Nittany Lions, even though he only had 40 yards last week against Youngstown, is tailback Evan Royster. He is on pace to become Penn State's all-time leading rusher.
And Bama will be without their top running back today. Heisman Trophy winner Mark Ingram is unlikely to play this afternoon or this evening. Saban did not entirely rule him out. However, the coach says he doesn't want to rush Ingram back too soon. The Alabama running back has missed a lot of practice, but then again, this is Mark Ingram we're dealing with.
If there's anybody in the world that could play without practicing, it's probably Mark or anything else.
So Alabama will probably be without Ingram, its best offensive player, and will certainly be without arguably its best defensive player. Marcel Darius suspended by the NCAA for 2 games after he attended an agent's party in South Beach earlier this year. Now, when we talked to you last week at this time, Alabama had planned to appeal according to Nick Saban, but upon further review, Saban said there just wasn't any precedent, no case for the Tide, so Darius will sit.
We don't really feel like we have a good precedent. This was pretty fair.
And later on in the program, we'll talk with ESPN's Brad Edwards about the loss of Darius and the probable loss of Mark Ingram and what that will mean for Alabama against Penn State this evening.
Yes, we are. And up next, you knew he was a talent on the football field, but did you know Mark Ingram also has a talent swinging the golf club or maybe just juggling golf balls? We'll talk with the Heisman Trophy winner coming up.
And also later on, ESPN's Brad Edwards will be heading over to do his radio show shortly, but first he'll stop by our set to talk about tonight's primetime matchup, as well as all things Alabama, and we'll even ask him about the BCS. He's an expert in that type of stuff. Stick around. This is Crimson Tide Kickoff presented by AT&T and Alpha Insurance.
Back here on Crimson Tide Kickoff, week number 2 for the big show. We'll be with you every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock right here on your home team station, WVUA. Thanks for getting up early with us today. If you notice the nice shirts that Gary and myself are wearing today, and you like to get one, well, you don't have to go too far.
Haven't been by, do so.
Well, here's something that you might not know about Heisman Trophy winner Mark Ingram. During his middle school years, he was an exceptional golfer before he turned his attention more towards football. But you see here, in this YouTube video, Ingram has still got it. He still knows all the tricks. Here he is juggling the golf ball, imitating that Tiger Woods commercial from a few years back, and check out that swing.
It's so high, it's like a 9.
I used to do that when I was like in 7th and 8th grade. I can still do it a little bit though.
All right, from the golf course back to football, how good is your team when the second team running back is a Sports Illustrated cover boy? Trent Richardson on this week's edition of SI with a headline reading, College Football Opening Statements, Breakout Players and Programs in Week 1. This is Alabama's 5th SI cover in the last year. Now that's more than any other college or pro team in any sport to be featured on the cover in the last year. It just goes to show you that the SI knows a good thing when it sees it, and it also knows how to sell copies of its magazine, because when you put Bama on the cover, just about everybody in this state rushes to the newsstand.
And coming up next on Crimson Tide Kickoff, presented by Alpha Insurance and AT&T, he's written for the New York Times as well as USA Today, and he now resides in the Happy Valley.
Indeed he does. We'll hear from a veteran sports writer who has a take on this Penn State-Alabama game from a unique perspective, and also some interesting Bear Bryant stories as well. That's straight ahead. But first, we've got Richard Scott.
Hey guys, coming up we have a look around the conference, a few SEC football forecasts, and there's a lot of storms out there. We'll talk about that coming up in weather. Stick around.
Penn State head football coach Joe Paterno comes into tonight's game with close to 400 wins and is the all-time winningest coach in FBS history. Paterno, who is in his 45th year at Penn State, was inducted into the College Hall of Fame in 2007. That makes him one of only 3 coaches that are still coaching that are already in the Hall of Fame. No question about it. When you say Joe Pa, people young and old respect this coaching icon.
Obviously, Coach Paterno is a guy who is greatly respected among all generations.
He's a great coach. He's been around for quite some time, long before even my dad was playing college football.
Everybody on this team has a great amount of respect for him, and we know that he's accomplished some great things over the years.
The way he's brought up that program since he's been there is great, so I'm looking forward to playing against Penn State. If I get the opportunity to shake his hand or reach out and just touch him maybe, I'm definitely going to take full advantage of it. I'm going to go for a hug. I'm going to...
Well, I hope when I'm 83, I'm still as young and spry as Joe Paterno is.
Our first guest this morning has reported for USA Today, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and Newsday. During his storied career, he interviewed some of the biggest names in sports, covered Super Bowls, Final Fours, Olympic Games, National Championship football games. And today, Malcolm Moran is the Knight Chair in Sports Journalism and the director of the John Curley Center for Sports Journalism at Penn State, and he joins us now live on the program. Malcolm, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gary. I do have one correction to make. Apparently there's been some speculation that Joe had something to do with the demise of the dinosaurs. It didn't happen that way, but he did tell them no turnovers and watch out for that meteor.
Okay. Glad we cleared that up.
For the record.
You've seen it from afar, working for the New York Times and other papers. Now you're right there in Happy Valley. 10 years ago, folks were ready to run Joe Paterno off. And I think he even said 5 years ago, so I need to have a good year or I'm going to take my rear end on out of here. He won 11 games in 2005, and since that time, they've been contenders every year. It's amazing at his age that he can still make the adjustments needed to stay on top of the coaching profession.
And that he has the energy level that's required. He's 83 years old. You know, and people, going back to the Big Ten media days in Chicago, people noted that he began to sound like he's older. Well, he is. But in the last few years, he's overcome a hip injury that required a hip replacement and a knee injury when he got the helmet on the knee in Madison in '06 that had 2 torn knee ligaments and a fracture, and he's still going.
Yeah, going strong. Certainly a coaching icon, another coaching icon, another living legend when he was alive was Bear Bryant. Interesting story. In 1979, you came down here to interview Coach Bryant. You got to sit in that infamous couch that sunk you right down. You felt like you were staring up at
nobody
God.
warned me about.
Oh, you didn't know about it?
No, and I just kept going.
Yeah.
And you know, and it was almost as if I was sitting on the floor, looking up over the edge of the desk, as if it's the Wizard of Oz. And then I discovered that I don't know what he's saying. I mean, I can't understand what he's saying. So it was a panic-stricken situation. But the thing that saved me was, at the end, I said, you know, Coach, I mean, I really appreciate your time. And sometimes things come up after the fact. Would it be okay if I give you a call? He said, fine. He could not have been more kind. And I called him back the next day and asked all the same questions.
He could understand him.
And his telephone voice was perfect. And so I survived. But I'll always remember how kind he was to me.
And a great story in the New York Times about that.
All right, Gary, thank you very much. And time now for some of the other games going on around the SEC today. And today, the Ole Miss Rebels head down to New Orleans to face Tulane. Coach Houston Nutt has had the difficult task this week of trying to keep his team together after last week they suffered an embarrassing loss to an FCS opponent, Jacksonville State.
You know, just a bitter taste in your mouth. Put it to bed and you go.
Florida won their game last week, but didn't look pretty doing it. The offense certainly did not resemble the offense of the last 4 years under Tim Tebow. Coach Urban Meyer says growing pains are part of football, and it's all about how you respond to them.
Mistakes and urgency to correct mistakes. We will get most of those things fixed.
And one of the bigger showdowns in the SEC this weekend happens in Columbia. Georgia will travel to face South Carolina minus star receiver A.J. Green, who has been suspended by the NCAA for 4 games. This matchup has traditionally been very close on the scoreboard.
I can't imagine it's going to be anything different than what we've had, and we need to be prepared for 60 minutes.
That game slated for 11 a.m., the early game in the SEC today. There you see the rest of the schedule on your screen. The big game, of course, Alabama and Penn State tonight at 6 o'clock. Now for a look at the weather around the SEC, here's Richard Scott.
Hey, John, yeah, we know the weather around here is hot, but let's talk about some other games happening across the SEC. We're talking some hot conditions over for Georgia and South Carolina. Let's go over and show you the graphics there, what's happening with the game there. Georgia, South Carolina. Of course, we've got much more in your forecast. Your local forecast is coming up.
Thanks, Richard, and still a lot more to do this morning on Crimson Tide Kickoff.
Absolutely. Coming up in the second half hour, we'll talk with ESPN's Brad Edwards and get his take on tonight's big game. Can Penn State mount a challenge with their freshman quarterback? You heard Malcolm Moran say this guy's a gamer. And how effective will Alabama be without a couple of their big playmakers on each side of the football? Stick around. We're just getting cranked up good on Crimson Tide Kickoff. There's a live shot of Bryant-Denny Stadium. Stay with us.
And welcome back to Crimson Tide Kickoff. You know, we're going to get back to talking about football, Alabama football, and sports in just a moment. But first, we did want to take a minute and acknowledge that this is the 9th anniversary of 9/11. We understand that this is a sports show, and that's what you've tuned in to see, but we did feel that it was appropriate and, quite frankly, the right thing to do to take a minute and acknowledge this.
Absolutely, John, without a doubt. This morning, all over the country, there are ceremonies going on to remember those who lost their lives in the terrorist attacks 9 years ago. What you're seeing here is a live look at a ceremony in New York City being held in the park just across the street from Ground Zero. All morning, family members will be reading the names of those who perished in the World Trade Center attacks. They're also observing 4 moments of silence at the exact times of when the 2 planes hit the towers and when each tower collapsed. Ceremonies are also underway at both the Pentagon to remember those who died there and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania to remember those brave Americans who died on Flight 93. And locally, there are several remembrance ceremonies planned, including one at the football game. Fans will be asked to observe a moment of silence following the national anthem, John.
And Gary, we're going to take a break, and don't touch that dial. We're just getting started here on Crimson Tide Kickoff. We got the second half hour coming up in just a moment, including ESPN's Brad Edwards. We'll be right back. Well, this just in, Nick Saban doesn't hold much back. You know, if you're a reporter and you ask a question that he doesn't like, he's probably going to tell you. And as it turns out, if you're a fan and you do something he doesn't like, he's also going to tell you. Take a listen.
And I think it would be a crying shame if we boo them when they come out of the stadium like we did last week's team. Because I just don't understand that. We can cheer for our team because what our team does doesn't have anything else to do with the other team or to anyone else.
Well, one thing you can say about Nick Saban, as you said, he gets to the point. Brad Edwards, ESPN, Radio Game Day, BCS expert, and you've dealt with Nick Saban. You know, like John said, ask him a question. You're going to get an answer.
Yeah, you will. He's a direct guy, and I think that's what makes him so successful as a head coach. Is that you know, he's all about business, and he's not about wasting time. And so you know, he's very efficient with everything he does. And I think one great thing that players who played for him, not just the guys right now, but guys who've moved on to the NFL, when you talk to them about Saban, they'll tell you that you always know where you stand with him. And that's a really good thing with a coach. And I think players respect that, and they respect it even more once they get older, and they know that a guy like that really helps them get better. Because if you know where you stand, and that also means you know when you need to make improvement. And Saban's a guy who gets the most out of his players.
No doubt.
Brad, let's get into tonight's game, the big game here in Tuscaloosa, Penn State and Alabama. Penn State, what do you see from them? They've got the freshman quarterback, and they've got to go up against Alabama's defense, which has been known to give quarterbacks in the SEC fits.
Yeah, and Joe Paterno will tell you this is one of the youngest teams that he's ever had, and it's not just because he has a true freshman quarterback, but that is a major story in this game. And did a little research on it this week and found out that there has never been an AP #1 ranked team lose a game on its home field to a team with a freshman quarterback, true or redshirt. So he's trying to do something that's never been done before. And so that is a big factor. The other thing for Penn State that I think right now worries them even more than having a true freshman quarterback is that last week against Youngstown State, they weren't able to establish the run. They have a good running back in Evan Royster, but they couldn't get the running game going against that team. And we know Alabama hasn't allowed a 100-yard rusher in a really long time, and if they can't get him, get him going to take some pressure off that young quarterback, it could be a long day for the Penn State offense. And so that's a major concern of theirs. And I think for Penn State to have a chance in this game, they have to establish some sort of running game.
Yeah, Royster 40 yards, very surprising last week against Youngstown State. But for Alabama, and of course around here, Alabama fans, when they're riding high, they don't think anybody's got a chance to beat them. And not giving, at least a lot of the fan base, not giving Penn State a lot of respect. But from an Alabama perspective, regardless of how talented, when you lose the Heisman Trophy winner, when you lose an Outland and Lombardi Award candidate on the defensive line, Courtney Upshaw, talented pass rusher who'll play on Sundays, he's banged up. He'll be less than 100%. They've got some issues going into this game.
You mentioned it earlier in the show. I mean, you're talking about their best offensive player in Ingram, probably their best defensive player in Darius, and I can't think of another team in the country where you could take away the best player on each side of the ball and that nobody would be making a big deal of it. And everybody's feeling sorry for Penn State, which is a testament to how well Saban has recruited and how well they've developed the talent once it's gotten here. But at the same time, they're vulnerable. I mean, you know what? You're vulnerable anytime you play a team that has talented players. Just look at last year for Alabama. The best teams they played weren't the ones that came the closest to beating them. They were some of the middle of the pack teams, Auburn and Tennessee. And so you've got to be careful anytime that you take the field. And if it's one of those games where you don't have your A game, and you never know when those days are going to come. You can't play your best every Saturday.
Thank you, Brad.
Brad, appreciate it.
My pleasure to be here.
Brad Edwards, ESPN.
Right now, let's find out how hot it's going to get. Richard Scott standing by with that.
Hey guys, I'll tell you this right now, it's too hot to be wearing a long sleeve outside. It's just some hot weather either way you put it. Last week we were very lucky, had a nice fall-like weather, a nice break in the hot weather and the humidity. Well, right now that's just not going to happen. Let's show you what's happening across the southeast, our satellite and radar. There is a cold front on. If you have plans for kickoff, we're talking temperatures in the mid-90s. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Richard. Up next on Crimson Tide Kickoff, she rolls with the Tide, he signs with the Nittany Lions. Today, only one of them is going to be happy. We'll introduce you to a couple that has some serious bragging rights on the line.
And John, also still ahead, so many great memories, so many great moments. We'll look back at the history of the Alabama-Penn State series. This is Crimson Tide Kickoff, presented by AT&T and Alpha Insurance.
And welcome back to Crimson Tide Kickoff. Julie and Joe McLaughlin have been football fans for quite some time and actually attended the 1979 Penn State-Alabama game. The only thing is, they were not married, did not even know each other at the time, and sat on opposite sides of the field. Julie's a lifelong Alabama fan, Joe a lifelong Penn State fan. Now 30 years later, they're married, and this will be the second time that they have both been in the stadium for a game between the Tide and Nittany Lions, and they join us now. Thank you all very much for getting up early with us today.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking, how did you two finally meet? You were in the stadium in 1979, but how did y'all finally meet each other?
I'm a Birmingham native. He was transferred to Birmingham, and we met at the complex that we both lived.
What's the last month been like for you two, knowing that this game's been coming up? Has there been a lot of trash talking?
Yes.
Mostly on my side.
But he has his own tickets. I'm not sitting with him at the game today.
You're not sitting with each other at the game.
My big concern was where I was going to sit.
And also, you were a producer on the Bear Bryant Show for the last 3 years. I know we've got some video of that. Tell us a little bit about what that was like.
That was an opportunity of a lifetime. Coach Bryant, we were all on his team. If he had asked us to suit up, we would have suited up and come down here and played for him. He was such an icon. Even back then, we'd all done it for free. There's our opening my potato chips.
Golden Flake and Coca-Cola, great combination. What was he like kind of in that setting? What was he like being around there?
Easy
going?
Easy, and a lot of teamwork. You could see him recruiting on the television show, and it was all about the mamas and papas, and it was his bad coaching. It was never the team or never the players. So he was very, very easy to work with.
And Joe, what about you? What maybe is your favorite Penn State memory of watching them all these years?
Well, actually, when Bears' last game was at Penn State, my seats, I still have season tickets, were right above where the visiting team entered and left the field. And Alabama was beating us pretty badly that day, and I went down to be where the team exited so I could see them leave the field. And I'll never forget seeing Bear walk off the field that day. And the games between Alabama and Penn State were always something special to, I think, both fan bases.
Real quickly, we're about to run out of time. Who's going to win the game today?
Roll Tide.
Penn State.
I just wanted to hear you two argue.
It's going on, yes.
Julie and Joe, thank y'all very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Glad to be here.
And up next on the program, Alabama and Penn State have produced some memorable moments over the years. Up next, we'll look at some of the games and talk to the players that were there. And later, will the Tide tame the Lions? Will the Gators bounce back after a rocky start? We'll get all those answers from our guest prognosticator, Crimson Tide Kickoff. Back after this. For the series' most memorable moments.
Alabama and Penn State are two of the winningest programs in college football history. It's been 20 years since Coach Joe Paterno and his Nittany Lions have stepped under the lights at Bryant-Denny Stadium. What makes that rivalry so huge between Alabama and Penn State?
The programs kind of mirror themselves in one way. It's just you have a northern type of ball and you have a southern style. And but when we played them, it was always one of the hardest hitting games of the year, period.
The legendary coaches that have walked the sidelines in Alabama's past, and of course, Paterno is still walking the sidelines.
When you've got those two schools coming at one another, both believing that they can win, both of them not scared, both of them going to lay it on the line, it always winds up being a great football game.
In Sugar Bowl 1979, number 1 undefeated Penn State faced off number 2 Alabama for the national championship. In the middle of the fourth quarter, Penn State was 4th and goal inside the Alabama 1-yard line. Tailback Mike Gooman was leveled by linebacker Barry Krause for no gain, leading the Crimson Tide to a 14-7 victory, and has gone down as one of the biggest tackles in college football history, known as the goal line stand. Alabama and Penn State have played some epic football games. This Saturday, over 101,000 fans will be in Bryant-Denny Stadium cheering on the Crimson Tide and welcoming back legendary Penn State coach Joe Paterno. After 20 years in waiting, it will be a game full of history, tradition, and pride. Reporting in Tuscaloosa for WVUA Sports, I'm Alex Cordry.
Thank you, Alex. Coming up, Northport Mayor Bobby Herndon is our guest prognosticator this week. And as we go to break, let's take a look at folks out at the Bear Bryant statue. Coach Bryant celebrating a birthday today. He would have been 97 years old if he were still alive, and in the hearts and minds of Alabama fans, he will always live. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Well, how did Penn State come up with its mascot? Penn State has been the Nittany Lion since 1907. It refers to the mountain lions that once roamed near the school and to Mount Nittany, a local landmark. The lion's primary means of attack is its strong right arm, capable of slaying many foes. So if you see the Penn State cheerleaders or fans doing a one-arm push-up after a touchdown, that's why. Well, time now to make some bold predictions. This week, John asked a local politician to look into his football crystal ball.
And it is time for our guest prognosticator segment. This week, we are joined by the mayor of Northport, Bobby Herndon. Mayor, thank you very much for being on. How are things in Northport before we get started?
Well, things are going pretty good. Everybody's excited about this weekend, Alabama, Penn State, and you know, I've seen a lot of Penn State fans going through Northport today, so it's getting exciting.
Well, let's get started here. First game, number 22 Georgia at number 24 South Carolina. How do you see this one?
Well, I'm going to go with the home team, South Carolina. I know that Mark Rick, I think, is on a hot seat this year, and I think it might even get a little bit hotter for him.
The Northport Mayor, Bobby Herndon. Mayor, thank you very much for coming by.
My pleasure.
89 at kickoff, halftime temperature 85 degrees. We could use the rain to cool us off, but not the lightning. Thunderstorms likely through the ending of the game.
All right, Richard, thank you very much, and thank you for watching Crimson Tide Kickoff.
More Alabama to come right after this program. We've got Hey Coach with Nick Saban. At 10 o'clock, we've got Crimson Cover. At 10:30, we've got Crimson Tide This Week. And at 11 a.m., one of my favorites, Crimson Classic.
Yeah, because you're on it.
Why not?
Yeah. See you next week, folks.